This is the inside of the airbox that sits on top of the transmission. And there are really components in there for two different functions. Now, the first function is the crankcase rebreather system, which is this hose, and then there's another hose that goes to the crankcase breather valve. And they filter back into these horns that connect to the carburetor intakes. And the purpose of that system is to pull any volatiles off the crankcase and put them back through the carburetors to burn in the engine. Now, the second system is involved with reducing air pollution by adding air that's filtered to the area around the exhaust valves, so that if there's any unburned gasoline or carbon monoxide, it'll be combusted before it goes out the tailpipe. And that's these two valves here. Now, they're activated by vacuum, which is brought to them by a hose which attaches to each carburetor. So each of these goes to each of the carburetors. And they open up and take filtered air out of the air box through a tube and into an intake area next to the exhaust valve. Now, this is the tube that comes off that valve, and it runs down along the engine and through a rubber hose, and then it comes around to the exhaust port area, and it's another metal tube that connects, and that's where the air is injected in here around the exhaust port. So when the exhaust valve opens, that air can combust anything from the unburned gas or convert carbon monoxide to carbon dioxide. So I'm going to start removing components by removing the crankcase rebreather system. And there's a little clamp here that holds the hose onto this plastic T for both hoses. And they'll pull out of these horns, and then I can get them out of the box, which will give me room to get to the valves that work on the air injection system to the exhaust ports. Now, I've got the little retaining clip off the hose and pulled it off of the plastic T, and then it pulls out of the side of the horn, and it's attached to a pipe which sits inside the horn, so that the other end of the pipe is centered, and that's where the unburned gases off the crankcase are injected into the intake pipe to the carburetor. Now, I pulled the end of the pipe off the end of the plastic tube, and then I pulled the tube out here through the bottom because it has little veins here that center it, and I don't want to snap those off. So the next thing that comes off is the connector for the intake pipe to the carburetor, and that just slides right out. And then you can bend the plastic on the horn and just snap it right back out. So it's all removed now. Next, I'm going to remove the air valve, and the vacuum line just pulls off of a nipple, and then I'll back the nut off here for the pipe and then remove the nut that locks this to the side of the air box. I used a 19 crescent to back this nut off, and it's a flange that fits in. And then this is a 24 millimeter nut that secures the valve to the side of the air box. So when I get that off, I should be able to pull out the air valve, and it's still connected with this little pinch clamp to the hose, So if I just slide that down, I can pull the little air valve off. Now to remove the air pipe from the exhaust port, it's a 19 millimeter nut, meaning it takes a 19 wrench. And mine actually had rusted through, so it broke off. But basically you just back this out and you get the pipe off. Now underneath the exhaust port is a fitting, which is where the pipe screwed in. And I'm going to remove it from the head with a 22 millimeter socket. And this is the air pipe that goes between the air box and the exhaust port after I've removed it. Now that the components are out of the air box, you can see that it mounts to the top of the transmission. On the left side is a bolt, and on the right side is a nut, which are how the transmission's mounted to the engine block. And there's also a center bolt here that mounts into the top of the transmission cover. This is the vacuum line, and I'll push that back through the grommet. And this is the T that was for the crankcase ventilation. And I can just pull that out, and then I'll push the hose back through the box when I remove it. Now to get this big hose grommet out, I use a screwdriver and I compress it and push backward, and it'll collapse and go through the hole. There it goes. Now once I get that big grommet out, the whole box will come out and I can remove it. On the back side is a T for the vacuum lines, and I can remove that fitting, but I've got the whole box off the transmission now. Now this is the hardware used to mount the air box. On the left is a long bolt and a thick flat washer, and on the right is a nut with the same thick flat washer. And in the center is a shorter bolt with, again, the thick flat washer. Now I was able to remove the vacuum line T, which fit into this hole here, and it was held in place by this little rubber grommet. So all I did is push the T out of the grommet and then pop the grommet out of the air box. So the air box is removed. So this is the top of the transmission. And this is where the long bolt went, where the nut went, and where the center bolt went in the air box. This is the hose that goes to the crankcase breather valve, which is inside this cover here. And everything's off the top of the transmission, so the next step is just to remove the transmission.